Hello and welcome back to Kvikmyndapod, an Icelandic cinema podcast. I'm Rob Watts, and on this podcast I discuss 21st century Icelandic film with my good friend Ellie Cawthorne. We've reached the final leg of another journey around the cinema of Iceland, and it's Reykjavik where we shall end for Baldvin Z's multi-narrative drama Life in a Fishbowl, or Vonarstræti from 2014. It's wonderful to end the series with a film by one of our favourite directors, and fascinating to begin to understand his visual style and the types of stories he wants to tell. Thanks to all our new listeners and the stalwarts, and thanks to those who engaged with us on Instagram and Twitter over the last few months. We can always be found there at Kvikmyndapod, that's KVIKMYNDAPOD. I'll be back at the end to let you know what the future holds for Kvikmyndapod, but for now, here's our final chat of the series. Hello, Ellie.
Hi, Rob.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
I'm great, thanks.
It's nice, actually, and reasonably warm in your flat with no heating on in this cost of living crisis.
Well,
as
thank
poor
you.
Podcasters can't afford heating these days.
Yeah, I've cut out all the chat that we just had about, smart meters and wrapping up in blankets.
You mean the audience don't want to hear how many pence each item in our homes costs to run per hour?
Probably not, and I don't either, to be honest. And also, if a lot of our listeners are in Iceland, they're probably used to cold, but also warm interiors.
This would be absolutely nothing.
No, although I'm pretty sure they've got it sorted in Iceland that, everything's geothermally heated, so it doesn't really cost anything.
Cost of living crisis means nothing over there.
No, but they have had their fair share of crises.
Nice segue. I see what you did there. Very good.
Thank you very much. We were talking about the financial crisis last week with Gunnar, and this week we're talking about a film set kind of just prior to all the craziness. So we're talking about Life in a Fishbowl from 2014 by Baldvin Z, who we haven't seen since series 1.
We haven't, and it's been long overdue because I really loved Let Me Fall. I think I might have said it was my favourite film of series 1.
Very possibly. I've not gone back to listen. Someone else will tell us. But it is fantastic, isn't it? It's an absolutely brilliant film. So it's great to be revisiting his work, and a film that came out before Let Me Fall. So it's good to start seeing the evolution of this director and his style. And shall I give a little synopsis?
Please
Not
do.
much of a synopsis that I've written this time. I'm sure we'll get into it, but here we go. In 2006 in Reykjavik, the lives of nursery teacher and part-time sex worker Ake, critically lauded but very much alcoholic writer Mori, and ex-footballer turned corporate businessman Solvi intersect, each one making a mark on the others. And
Is that all you're going to give us?
That's all I'm going to say, because we're going to get right into it anyway, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. I like what you did there with the synopsis, that each of our key characters had two sides to them. And I hadn't really thought about it till you put it like that. We have, mum and kindergarten worker who has to moonlight as a sex worker when she doesn't really want to. Mm-hmm. We have a writer who is critically lauded, but also an alcoholic and has got a lot of issues there. And we've got, dashing, charming former footballer who's had to sell his soul to the banks. So the way you put it there actually has really illuminated these characters for me. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to have done that.
Sölva og njótum kvöldsins. to the Viking.
Við erum lent í partíi hjá valdalustu mönnum á Íslandi.
So, let's start with our main characters, because this is a film much like things like Crash, Magnolia, films with multi-narratives. So all three characters we see throughout the film, their lives slightly or even more intersecting, and, you know, how they influence each other.
I always think that narratives like this, where you have multi-narratives and they all play into each other and come in and out, always feels to me like it's adapted from a book.
Okay.
And I don't know why that is. I think probably because it's just quite a common literary trope. More and sometimes I think a book can sustain multiple narratives more easily than a film can.
Sure.
I mean, there's only 3 here, so I think the film sustains them all pretty well. But do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. In the printed word, you can at least see the distinction between each narrative, I suppose. You go from chapter to chapter often, where it's focused on one person's story, and then as you get on, you start seeing them cross over.
Yeah.
Whereas here it can be a bit more like, oh, when are we? Where are we? Because we don't get any date or time stamps. And this one, so we've got the 3 characters. We also have flashbacks, which sort of throws a little
spanner in the works.
Yeah, a little bit, because it did confuse me initially.
There was something about this film that really did make me feel like it was adapted from a book.
Was it the title?
Because the title is also the title of the book. Okay. But something in its structure, its plotting, its use of characters, and how they all intersected. I think it felt also, and I actually really don't mean this as an insult, like a really good kind of TV drama. It could have been as well, and maybe in 3 parts or 4 parts. Because you've got all these different things running alongside one another. But obviously it's not adapted from a book, so fine.
No, but we do have in the film the novel Life in a Fishbowl.
Of course, there's the novel in the film as well, and then references to other novels, and the fact that one of our main characters is a writer, which all adds to that literary connection sense.
And talking about those books, so the one that we see our writer Maury give to his publisher in this film is titled Life in a Fishbowl. And the previous one is titled Lomera Fatla.
Let Me Fall.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, which is the previous director's film. What is he doing here? He's trying to mess with our minds.
Yeah, I don't think that whatever Maury wrote is the film that we then later saw. I don't think there'll be any connection between the storylines. What do you think?
Well, this is part of what confused me, because also there's this whole question of Maury writing this book that is essentially about himself. It's kind of an autobiography, so which then brings in layers of, if he's writing books called Let Me Fall, and then there's a film, it's very complex.
Well, I was thinking about this, and I wonder whether, you know, his previous books, Let Me Fall and the like, were just fiction. And here we've got a fictionalized version of his life, because we hear his publisher say, you should just put your name in it, because then we all know it's you anyway. But I've probably mentioned this guy before on the podcast, but the Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgård, he started writing fiction, and then he's most famous for his 6-part autobiographical fiction work. So essentially, it's all published as fiction. It's the story of his life, written from a first-person point of view, with his name in it, but other people's names perhaps changed, but written as if it was fiction. I'm not sure where the distinction lies there, or how it gets to be known as fiction. But Maury writing this reminded me of that, and I wondered whether maybe that was an influence on what he's doing there.
Yeah, it's all a bit meta, isn't it? It makes me think of, there's a book called The End of Eddie, which is a French book, which I've read in translation, which is a similar thing where there's a central character, it's fictionalized as a central character, which shares the author's name, and is kind of based on his life. But I guess people maybe don't always want to really throw themselves behind stuff as autobiographies, because then they're like tying themselves down to one definitive version of events. Whereas
that's a good point.
If you say it's fiction, you can play with the narrative or with the narrative arc or the truth a bit more, and make a better book.
That's it. Play with the truth, but also if you
and not piss everyone off,
or if you forget something or misremember something, at least then you aren't on the hook for pissing someone off because you've misremembered. But having said that, I'm pretty sure Knausgaard got it in the neck from his ex-wife and various other people from throughout his lives, because it's quite clearly them. In
this context, it's a bit confusing and meta though, isn't it? Because we have a film that's about a writer that writes a book that's got the same name as the film and has written a book that has the name of the director's future film. Yeah. It's a bit of a tangled web. It is. And you know what confuses it even more is that both film titles, both English film titles, are the names of songs by director Baldvin Z's friend's band. So Birgir Örn's band Mouse had songs called Life in a Fishbowl and Let Me Fall. So the title track from their 97 album is Lómera falla a þínu eyra, and the second one is Lifið í fiskaburinu, which is Life in a Fishbowl. Whether they have anything thematically to do with these films, I don't know. But yeah, it's all very sort of tangled and confusing. Mm. But that title, Life in a Fishbowl, it's quite evocative, I suppose, because we spoke about it last week and in many episodes how Reykjavik's very small, the country's very small. It's very hard to get away from people you know. So if you're trying to live a double life, or if you're the drunk author who is really, really famous, how do you wander around without people knowing that? And it's a nice idea, isn't it, that even people you don't know, these lives all intersect in ways that they're not always aware of. Yeah. So sometimes they're kind of seeking each other out, and sometimes they've met, but they don't even remember they've met, and they overlap in interesting ways. Mm-hmm. And that's just the case of city living in Reykjavik. As Ake points out to the one person who clearly doesn't know who Maury is, who works at the nursery, he's Maury. He's a famous writer. He's probably not, at the nursery to perv on little children, although he doesn't help himself by looking like a utter just... wrongin'. Yeah. And finally, one last point on the title. The Icelandic title is not Life in a Fishbowl. It's Vonarstræti. Now, directly translated, that means Hope Street, which I also think is the name of the road on which Maury lives in the film. I'm so confused. But there's this idea, I guess, of, maybe it is the name of the road in the film, but Hope Street, again, that plays into the themes of the film. Like, we've got three characters. Mm-hmm. One who's already been through a tragedy. Well, no, two who've been through quite big tragic moments in their past. Solvi, and we'll come to Solvi in a second because his storyline I'm interested in. But these two characters have gone through shit and they meet each other and there's this kinship and this friendship. And I think ultimately the story is hopeful for the most part by the end. So looking at the film as this like long, not street, this journey towards hope is kind of a nice way to look at it. Definitely.
Blessaður, ég heiti Eik. Sælar, Þormóður. Þormóður, blessaður. Þú ert að vinna hérna í leikskólanum við tjörnina, ekki? Jú, já, ég sá þig þar daginn. Og hvað búið að tilkynna mann? Nei. Hún var svo helvíti illilegur varðundurinn hann, urraði bara á mig. Já, hann vissi ekkert hver þú varst, hann var bara... Viltu vera einhver gamall perri? Já, hver veit.
I think it is a hopeful film ultimately, and I think it's also a really empathetic film. Yeah. What I loved about Let Me Fall was that it took characters who, in a lot of ways, weren't very empathetic. Mm-hmm. Addicts, generally just get a rough reputation in society, don't they? And it really gave them humanity, but it didn't shy away from the bad things they did. So it basically took characters who may be in a bad place and doing bad things, but it really made you feel for them. And I think that is carried through into this film. Or you could say it's carried through from this film into that film. That we have characters who do quite abhorrent things at times. Or I'm thinking of Maury here, when we see in flashbacks that he's beat his wife and behaved pretty terribly. He does terrible things in the course of this narrative as well. And characters that people might judge for their lifestyles and choices. So Ake, obviously, is a sex worker. And it takes those characters and it really makes you understand them, or it gets inside their head. It gives them like a lot of agency and compassion.
For sure. I think that's what Baldvin Z is really good at, is giving us these characters. And yeah, the films are 2 hours plus, but it really does enable you to get into their world, into their life and into their minds, and see things from both sides and ultimately let you make a decision on how you feel about them.
Yes.
So should we start with talking about Ake herself then, played by Hera Hilmar, who is Icelandic film director Hilmar Oddson's daughter. Now, we haven't covered any of his films yet, mainly because he only did one film this side of 2000, starring Ingvar Sigurðsson. But he does have a new film coming out in the new year called Driving Mum, which looks to be an incredibly dark comedy. So hopefully we'll be able to cover that next year. But yes, Hera Hilmar, who is fantastic in this as Ake. And yeah, like you say, Ake is a single mother. We know she's got a daughter who's 8 and she has sex with men to make money. And that's kind of how it starts, isn't it? We see her working in both jobs and then just sort of making decisions that you can understand, but aren't necessarily the ones you think she should make. I don't know. Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because she says, she's 24, she's got this 8-year-old daughter, but she looks like she could be 18.
Well, this is another thing I was going to say. That first interaction with the guy, she looks so young.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
But when you see her going out for her night out, she looks much older. Very, very different style of dress. And I mean, I guess she's playing to what her clientele want.
After. And it's worth saying, isn't it, that there's many different ways of portraying sex work, isn't there, on camera? And this is very much of the stark, bleak variety. Like, these are the worst, most unsexy sex scenes you've ever seen.
Very much so. She's not there for fun. She's not having a nice time.
This doesn't feel like it's an empowering situation for her. It feels like for her, this is something she has to do because she is in a lot of debt.
She's just turning up. She's letting herself be used and leaving again. She doesn't bring herself to the job even. And I think that's quite interesting, in that even the men don't wish to be kind of loved. They don't need any emotion because she's there, cold as you like, just zoning out, and they're going for it. But that's all they want. It's pretty grim depiction, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's a very grim depiction. But then we get this different side of her life, which is the love between her and her daughter. Oh, yeah. Which clearly then obviously fills out the picture of why she's doing something she's clearly not comfortable with and clearly isn't happy about. And I thought that side of things was really nicely portrayed.
Every moment that she's with her daughter, Heather, is just so sweet and lovely, and she clearly cares for her. And even in the moments when Maury is round and they're all together, it's just so nice. And they clearly, they care for her, and that's the kind of the bright side of her life. That's why she'll go through all those terrible things and why she ends up going to Florida, which we'll come to in a bit.
Ertu að fara? Já, elska mín. Þetta vinnuferð. Ég tala við afa hvort hann geti ekki verið með þér. Gerir öll eitthvað rosa skemmtilegt saman? Allt í lagi. Svo geti kannski keypt eitthvað flott handa þér úti. Kannski eitthvað geggjaðan jólapakka. Og jólatrí líka. Og jólatrí líka. Ég ætla ekki að fara að kaupa jólatrí á Flórida. En jú, ég get kannski keypt jólatrí þegar við komum heim.
Já.
Þú ekki það?
Breytilegur. Ertu að fara með Móra?
Nei, ég ekki að fara með Móra.
Er hann kærastinn þinn?
Nei, ástu mín, hann ekki kærastinn minn. Bara góði vinir.
Við erum samt næstu alltaf saman.
Heiða.
So she's living with her daughter in this flat, but we find out that her parents are wealthy. Now, I was going to ask you, there are a couple of things in this film where if I hadn't watched it a second time, I might not have picked up on, or I didn't pick up on. So the one is that Solvi was a footballer. I didn't really notice that the first time. But the second one was her parents being well-known and wealthy. And I totally didn't really get that, especially when we see them. They don't come across as rich people or people who come from money.
Well, they come across as people who have a comfortable home, which I guess is the point, that she's having to take on all this sex work that she doesn't want to pay this overdraft and bills. And the idea is that then you see her parents and they're clearly fairly stable and got a fairly comfortable existence. So you would think, well, why wouldn't she just borrow money from them or stay with them? So I guess that adds to the question of her past and why she's had to make these decisions that she has had to.
Yeah, because there's a lot of background questions going on from the start that don't get resolved until the final third. But on that subject of her parents, I quite liked being told where they lived, because it reminded me that when we were watching Cop Secret, I'm sure you won't remember this, but the two main characters in Cop Secret, one is the cop from Reykjavik, the other is a cop from Garðabæjar, which is where her parents live.
The country cop, small town cop.
Sure, because Garðabæjar, the joke in the film is that Garðabæjar is so rich and affluent and well off that it doesn't need any policing, while Reykjavik is this sort of much more proper city, crazy place where, stuff is going down all the time. And I love the idea that in that film that, it is a place that's divided, the kind of locals. And in this film, it kind of is similar, because you've got the parents just on the outskirts of town who have the money, but she won't go to them. And she's in Reykjavik doing, nasty stuff.
It's a question of pride, isn't it, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think it's pride that keeps Maury from revealing his secrets until he's written the book? It's probably not pride, is it? It's just a sense of shame, I guess.
Yes, but I would get the sense that this idea of life in a fishbowl, right? That everybody knows what happened to his daughter.
That's true, I suppose.
We've launched right in there, haven't we, and not explained what happened to his daughter.
That's okay. We can talk about it.
I would assume that everybody knows what happened to his daughter. I mean, we may as well tell.
Well, we've been spoiling every film we've ever talked about, so yes, let's get into it.
So we find out in a flashback that after a fight between him and his wife that got violent, Maury's daughter runs onto the river, She runs onto Tjörnin, which is the big lake/pond outside City Hall in the centre of Reykjavik, and falls through the ice and dies, which to me is very triggering, because number one lesson from my mum as a child was always never ever go on a frozen pond or any kind of ice. I think maybe I don't know how familiar you are with Little Women, but there's a famous scene in Little Women where one of the characters, no spoilers for this 1860s novel here, but falls through the ice and is fine. But it's always been drilled into me. I don't know why my mum was obsessed with that. Don't go on frozen lakes.
Did lakes and ponds get frozen much more often up north?
Up north in the 90s. Yeah, I didn't really think I had much opportunity, to be honest. But even if I had, I wouldn't have gone anywhere near them.
Well done to your mum. It is well known in Iceland that lake does freeze over. So running across it as a child probably, I mean, it's still very dangerous, but I guess people were slightly less concerned. But that scene is just so well done because you have the two narratives playing out at the same time, the two children running towards the ice, because you've got, Maury has the fight with his wife in the past. Maury abandons Heather in the flat on her own
in the present,
and she leaves the flat. We know that she's got diabetes, which is Chekhov's diabetes. Chekhov's insulin stick. EpiPen, is that the word?
Chekhov's EpiPen.
There we go. But they're played out at the same time, so the kids are running to the ice, and I was watching it now. One of them is going to go in.
It's immensely stressful, isn't it?
Very stressful. So brilliantly shot. But you're right. It's Collar, his daughter, who falls in. She falls in and gets trapped, but he goes after her. What makes it even more tragic is he's trying to save her, falls in himself and smashes his head and just gets knocked unconscious. And so the film opens with him being dragged, or with him being resuscitated on the side of the pond.
Oh my God, it does. I hadn't even realised. Yeah.
This is the thing. The films, you forget about some of these things. Like, I'll remember that moment. I wonder what that means. And then you don't. But so it opens with him being saved and everyone's so happy that he's been saved. But little do they know, his daughter's in there too. And at this point, later on in the film, is when we see that, she didn't survive. And it's pretty bad.
And so, of course, that gives us a backstory, doesn't it, of why this great writer has become what he has, which is essentially, well, obviously he's an alcoholic, but he's kind of just hanging around bars, getting beaten up by people. He's got a very nihilistic approach to life. He's not looking after himself in any way, shape or form. No,
he still does seem to be quite good at what he's good at, though.
I know. He can somehow write a 5-star award-winning novel when he's absolutely off his face every day, all day.
But, I guess Hemingway.
Yeah, people do it. People do it. It's, maybe, just helps the creative juices flow in that scenario.
Hey, I guess so. I mean, it is widely known that drugs and alcohol help. But we get these things, these tragedies kind of drip fed throughout the film. And that opening scene is one of them. But there's also that moment that ties in with what we're saying about him being still quite a cognizant and well-versed guy. That he goes up to the open mic night and he reads a poem out, which is a beautiful scene. And in the first watch, I was like, yeah, it's very nice. It's very poetic. But on second watch, he's just describing what happened when Collar died. And it hits even harder the second time.
Harrowing.
Very, very much. And just a really clever kind of device that if you're paying enough attention, you might be able to start piecing things together. But I never do that on a first watch. I'm terrible. I just let everything wash over me until I'm surprised at the end.
That's probably a good way to be. You get the joy of the surprise.
The sadness of the surprise.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm always trying to second guess anything and be like,
really?
What's caused this? Where's this going to go? I bet this is going to happen.
Oh, so I wonder, did you watch the most recent Lord of the Rings TV show?
Yes, I did.
Did you know the thing?
Oh, well, yes, I did know the thing.
Okay.
I partly narrowed it down, but also everybody on the internet was, there's too much chat. There's too much chat.
See, that's one of the good things about Icelandic film. It doesn't get spoken about enough to really ruin things for you on an everyday basis. We're here to do that. But in that series, I did not even know we were supposed to know that someone was someone. And it was a shock.
See, I just had big old nerd central next to me telling me about the different theories of who could be a certain person.
Snore.
And why this person couldn't and this person could, because they were, involved in this age of whatever. Anyway, you could cut all
out. Talking of those narrative kind of drip feeding moments. So with Ake, we have her dad and her parents. Dad, played by Kvikmyndapod actor extraordinaire Theodor Juliusson, who, you know, is great. Although he seems quite old to be her dad. But anyway, when she goes round, pretty much every time she goes round with her daughter, Heather, we get told, this guy, why is this guy here? If he's here, Heather cannot be here, and she'll get dragged away. And we don't know who he is in that first instance. And we don't know why she hates on him so much. But something is there. Something is not right, is it?
I like the term that you use there of narrative drip feeding, because I think that is what it is. And it's like things kind of slowly come into view.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it transpires that this is her grandfather who abused her. But what I think isn't clear wasn't clear to me, maybe it was to you on a second viewing, was how much her parents were aware of that.
I feel like they weren't, but I don't know, the mum, if there's a weak link in this film, I think it's the mum.
In terms of narrative explanation, in
terms
terms of character
development.
In terms
of character and acting. I don't know whether it's the acting or whether that mum really is that just ridiculously unaware of everything.
She's a damp sandwich.
Yes, nice reference there to your strange saying that you brought up before. But she really is. Like, it's hard to tell whether she's aware and wants to ignore it and buries it, or whether she just was so unaware and just didn't know that she couldn't have an opinion on it.
I think perhaps it's the former, because if you think about the fact that Ake won't accept any help, well, she'll obviously accept childcare, but she won't accept any money from them. She clearly doesn't have a good relationship with her mother. I think, you know, maybe she raised accusations, or told them what was happening, and they didn't believe her, or that's the kind of the story that I filled in the background.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it feels like her dad understands her to a degree, but is also willing to listen to his wife and let Heather be there so long as Ake doesn't know. But if they knew, would you really put a young girl near her? I don't know. Maybe he didn't know, but she did, but had buried it. Yeah, I feel like if that was at the top of their mind, then you can't bring another young girl near her. I don't know. What did you think about the moment that this all came out right at the end? Because her granddad had been a drug abuser and was now off the drugs, but basically dying when we see him in the hospital. What did you think of that moment where she confronts him? Did it seem like it was like all this exposition dump?
It was a slight exposition dump, yes. But I guess I found it realistic, perhaps, or interesting how little catharsis there was. There was no he was basically just unconscious. She was never going to get an apology from him. She also wasn't going to get this big confrontation with him. It was a bit of an exposition dump, but I guess it was this sense of there wasn't going to be some kind of closure. She wasn't going to get what she needed and then be like, oh, I guess it's all in the past now.
Okay.
So I thought that was at least neatly kind of maneuvered.
Right, because I felt like, well, this is the moment that we've been building to, sort of. We knew something was going to happen, but maybe now she's said it out loud, and again for her mum to hear that, okay, now she can move on. Because the end, you know, she is happier, whether, you know, a lot of that will be to do with Murray's money, I'm sure, that she can now live a decent life. But I feel like there was a degree of her being like, right, well, you're going to be dead in a minute. I've said it all out loud, maybe for the first time in, I don't know, 9 years. And Mum's heard it. She can't ignore that now. Let's try moving on.
I read it slightly differently, that just if something like that happens to you, I don't think there is a neat conclusion to it where you kind of say, you abused me, this is all the terrible things, and this is how I feel, and the person says, oh, I'm sorry, and then conveniently dies. I think...
Well, he didn't apologise anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I felt like that was a fairly realistic portrayal of...
Well, especially given that Heather seemingly is a child of incest. So she's going to have to live with that for the rest of her life. But she seems to have sort of come to terms with it to a degree more than she had by the end. And, you know, their relationship's always been very special. And you get that final kind of look where she sits next to her on the sofa and just looks at her like, cool, you're my daughter, I love you, and this is life and we're good.
Hvað ekki að reyna? Ha? Hvað heldur þú segja? Vildur þú segja fyrirgefðu? Fyrirgefðu? Hvað fyrir að þú lest mér runga þér þegar ég var hvað 6 ára eða náttúrulega þegar þú reiðist mér fyrst. Þá var ég náttúrulega orðin 11 ára.
So her story has all these ups and downs, but is kind of mostly focused on the friendship that she has with Mauri, who is played by Þorsteinn Bachmann, who we've seen many, many times.
Yeah.
He's a great actor.
He's on great form in this film.
Isn't he?
Because he's got a lot of different things to do. He's got to play him in the past as this basically pre-alcoholic days where he's just kind of a general guy. That's a bit
He's just a normal
He's not quite a normal guy, is he? There's just
what's that meme? That CBeebies meme? He's just a normal
guy.
Man.
He's just a man, an innocent man. Isn't that?
Well, that's what he is at the start, right?
But yeah, so obviously that side of things, then he's got to have a more sympathetic side to him in the present, where we kind of see that he's good-hearted ultimately, and we get this vision kind of shining through the drunkenness of his intellect and things. But then there is this darker side to him, which is much less sympathetic. So he's got a lot to get his teeth into there.
Yeah, and he grows his hair, so he looks pretty unrecognisable. And it's probably quite useful to show that he's a lot older now, because it was all filmed at the same time, remember? This is a film.
I'm glad that you explained how the premise of a film works there. Thank you.
Only 4 series in. Guys, they film these things mostly at the same time over a course of months. So yes, his relationship with Ake is really interesting because depending on, you know, your outlook or what you may have seen on film before, it could go a couple of different ways.
I was so tense about this for quite a lot of the film, and I think the film knows that, and I think it kind of allows space for that and kind of almost revels in that, where it's like, oh, he's old and much older. How much? What? 20 years older,
At
probably.
Least. Yeah.
He's 20, and he's he's an alcoholic. He's got this long, scraggly beard, and it lets you be like, oh no, is this going to become a romance? Are they going to get together? I really hope not. It feels creepy. I don't like it. And then it takes that to the real edge, doesn't it? And
sure.
then kind of goes, no, we're not going to do that. Don't worry.
But that's the thing is, you don't want that to happen because their friendship just sort of blossoms out of nowhere. They meet, and I don't know how many 24-year-old women would befriend this old guy, drunk guy, as easily. But, you know, Ake, she's her own woman. She's made lots of personal choices that not everyone would necessarily make. So she starts drinking with him, and I don't know why she wouldn't get served at the bar, that it had to be him that got the drinks, because in my experience, it's not usually the guys that get served first. But that relationship starts in the bar, and it just carries on. That first evening, they're having a great time. And if anyone's saying anything about sex, it's Ake. And you can see in Maury's eyes that he's like, no, this is not. He knows, even drunk Maury knows that's not the way to go. But she's the one who persuades him to come back to hers for coffee. And that's all that happens. And yeah, I just love the way that they built this friendship. And ultimately, like you're saying, that specific moment where she leans in and kisses him on the lips, it's her decision to do that. Yeah. So this boundary of friendship relationship, which is very common in like intense friendships like that, I think was really, really well done. It was nice to see it come from that side as well, because very often it comes from the male side.
Yeah, it definitely left him kind of preserved his dignity by doing that. And if he'd done it, you'd think, oh, he's a creepy old man. He always wanted this all along. So it really helps save him. And I guess their friendship, the premise is, I guess, that they're both really two lost souls. They're like two outsiders of society. And that's where their kinship lays.
Yeah, I think we talked about it briefly, weirdly, with Thirst, that they're these outsiders who meet and sort of learn to help and rely on each other to the point where she feels so comfortable with him that she leaves her daughter with him. Which
I thought was a very questionable decision.
Yeah.
2 things. 1, general safeguarding.
Just generally.
General safeguarding, especially when you yourself as a child have experienced abuse. General safeguarding, not great. 2, she does know he's an alcoholic.
She does.
And an alcoholic is probably not who you want to be looking after your kid.
No, not solo. It's mad. There's a line where she says, I trust Maury more than you'll ever know, way more than Grandad. And it's like, fine, but geez.
I guess maybe that's a slight narrative hole in the film, that maybe we're meant to infer that they have a bit of a longer and more continuous relationship than we get to see on screen, because obviously you can't show all of that. I mean, there's a couple of lines where somebody says, oh, you're always together, which are inferring that there's more to their relationship than we've seen depicted.
Definitely.
But I think maybe that is a point where it slightly fell down, where you thought, really, you're going to leave your daughter with this guy?
We recognise that you're friends.
Yeah.
And it's a good friendship. But yeah, he's still an alcoholic who is very much still drinking. So yeah, there's all sorts of bad stuff could happen and does happen. I was watching a film called Can You Ever Forgive Me last week. I don't know if you've seen it. It's Melissa McCarthy and Richard E. Grant.
Wait, is it the Poison Pen Letters one?
That's the one.
No, I have seen that, yeah.
The Marielle Heller film, which in many ways isn't the same at all. But
in many, many ways.
It is about a writer, weirdly, but it's also about, she leaves her cat with Richard E. Grant.
Yeah.
Who we know is very much a drunk and an unpredictable kind of guy. And she leaves him at her flat to look after the cat. Cat dies. With that fresh in my mind, the second that she let Maury look after Heather, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it was only going to go one way.
Yeah, but thankfully it doesn't go that way, really. Heather has an attack, but somehow makes it to her grandparents, and all is okay. But I think Ake let him off a little bit too easily.
Oh, way too much. Like that is kind of unforgivable crime.
Yeah.
Like that is number one. If I leave my child with you, don't leave them alone and go off and get drunk.
It's true.
It's quite unforgivable.
It's a plot point that the film kind of very swiftly moves on from, because she goes around his flat. He doesn't apologize, but she discovers about his daughter she sees the room and then she reads about it in the novel. But I don't see how that's enough for them to then get back onto friendship terms.
Well, I guess they don't really.
Well, no, I suppose not. They end with him giving her all the money and him pissing off to Sardinia.
Good for him, I guess.
Yeah. Did you like his moustache?
No. It was too dangly down the edges.
It was quite musketeer-like.
Yeah, I didn't like it.
No.
I don't like... I mean, everybody have whatever moustache you like, but I don't like the ones that go curve around the edge and go down the side.
Yeah, sure, I know what you mean. They kind of have two separate curls almost.
Yeah, no.
No. But you know what we haven't spoken about?
Solvay. At all.
The third wheel of this film.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a lot going on in this film, because you have the two characters, Aiki and Mori, that we've discussed a lot. As we said, they're both outsiders. They both had a trauma. They both have a connection through experiences with daughters. They're really kind of interwoven, and you can see the thematic similarities going in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this kind of completely tonally different experience of the Flash former footballer who becomes a banker. So we've got these like people on the real fringes of society, like grasping around for money for a bit for survival. And then we have this guy on the other hand. And for a long time in the film, I was like, how are these going to match up?
Uh-huh. And they do ever so slightly, feel like very kind of not blink and you'll miss it, but he doesn't have a relationship with the two characters in the way that they have with each other. So yeah, I mean, he's sort of an outsider in this world that he's now in, because he was a footballer, now he's in the bank world, the financial world. So there's that kind of thematic connection. But yeah, it feels and this is, I imagine, deliberate, that it does feel very different. It's a different type of person. It's a different type of Reykjavik, and one that's very much of its time, like pre-collapse. And it's obviously something Baldvin wanted to explore, but I don't know that it needed to be in this film. If you took him out
and use that time to maybe flesh out a few things in the Ake and Mori story, then perhaps it might have been better served. I mean, I did enjoy that subplot, but like you say, it sits slightly weirdly within this film. Yeah.
I guess it goes to show that there are these two sides to Reykjavik, that the little
inequality.
The inequality, the little people, in inverted commas, can be affected by the big banker types, as they were in that period. And I wrote down so much jargon about like banking crap.
My favourite was go buy this hotel. Here are the people's names. Go and buy it. What shall I offer them? Or like, what's the deal? Or give me the details. There aren't any details. Just go and buy it.
Yeah.
That's not how you do a deal.
I felt a lot like even maybe the filmmakers weren't 100% sure what Siggy's deal was.
Yeah.
Like, what was he doing to the numbers? And who was he trying to impress? How was he going to be the guy? Because what it felt like, Siggy is the worst character. What a horrible man. But it felt like they were trying to say, this guy is the reason these type of people were the bankers who brought down the Icelandic banks and whatever. But I never really understood what he was doing with regard to fixing the numbers. Or
have you watched the BBC drama Industry?
I have not.
So that's set in a bank, and every other word is like so jargony, but you can tell that the people who've written it at least have like an incredible consultant, that they have gone like deep. They have gone deep into the jargon, and they know, like, it's the same as Succession. Would be a really good other example. Here it did feel a bit more like, you fixed the numbers, we don't really know what that means, but
it's bad,
but don't worry about that.
He was very much he was much more of a comic villain than, you know, more nuanced characters like Mori, who, you know, has both sides. Siggy seemed to just be in everything for himself, didn't care for his wife, didn't care for his soon-to-be born, possibly damaged baby. He was
maybe a bit too terrible. Like, maybe people in banks are like that,
well,
but like
someone was doing terrible stuff.
Terrible.
Yeah. I was trying to understand, Solvi's trying to impress and he's trying to make his way in this world. But how much does he want to impress Siggy, and how much is he... Because then he goes behind Siggy's back, so he's learned something. How many of these people are bad and how many of them are good? And he's still done all that work for Siggy anyway, ultimately.
Well, I thought his narrative arc was actually quite interesting, because you think initially that he's going to be like the good guy that takes these corrupt guys down or like doesn't give in to it. But he's actually quite quickly kind of co-opted into the system. And also this whole thing about they go to Florida and they're basically like, will fund a load of sex workers for the business trip, which is clearly not really a business trip. And he's, standing aside from that and saying, kind of being like, oh, I'm better than that. I have a good relationship with my wife. But then quite quickly just throws all that out the window, and really in the end turns out to be quite a nasty piece of work.
Yeah, certainly he ends in the worst position from a sort of audience point of view. Like you say, he starts off as the kind of wide-eyed, naive guy who wants to be good. And then we see, the amount of PDA as with his wife is a bit much for me.
It's a bit unnecessary.
Yeah. But he
it's
seems
like to demonstrate, look how in love they are.
They really are, yeah. And we see a lot of that, and he does seem to love his wife, but very quickly he meets Ake, he sleeps with her, and becomes an arsehole overnight. I don't know how much time he spent with Siggy and them, but this other guy, Gusti, who was in the film we watched recently, The County, he's managed to get to where he is without doing a lot of that, it seems. But maybe he hasn't. Maybe he's just better at hiding it.
But I guess it's just maybe that's what Baldvin Z is trying to say about even people who start off quite decent are getting like corrupted by this horrible system of more money, more power.
I just feel very sad for his wife, Agnes, and his daughter, because
it's like you have the perfect situation and it's like not enough.
I guess he was used to money from being a footballer, although probably not as much as Premier League players, I imagine.
The interesting nuance I found in that story was obviously, like you say, he sleeps with Ake and he sees her in this context of Florida, this kind of horrible business trip. And then when she says, of course, I'm the kindergarten school worker that you're at your kid's school, that like completely switches his attitude towards her. Well, firstly, that he doesn't even recognize her.
Yeah.
So it's partly that like, well, it's two things really, isn't it? That she's like totally dehumanized. One, and that he has this kind of idea that, oh, if she's a sex worker here, she would never be the same person that's a kindergarten person. So he's kind of like stripping her of that humanity, I guess. But also just the fact that she's okay in that fantasy world, but if she comes into reality, she's like offended him or like transgressed or crossed some boundary.
Yeah. This reminds me of two questions I wanted to ask. So firstly, does he choose to sleep with her does he choose to think of her as a sex worker or as the daughter of this really rich guy? Because he says basically, oh, I thought you were one of the ladies here for our purposes. But then she tells him that she's the daughter of whatever her dad is named Þorsteinn someone or other. And then it's then that they sleep together. So in my mind, I'm like, well, what? Was he not sleeping with her because she was a sex worker? But now she's revealed who she really is. He's choosing to think of her not as a sex worker, but as perhaps someone who can, I don't know.
Consent.
Yeah, consent, but also as someone who can help him in his career, maybe as the daughter of someone wealthy.
See, I hadn't picked up on that nuance actually at all. I guess the thing I wasn't sure about was, did she think he recognized her from the kindergarten?
Probably
because
she did.
Said, "Oh, isn't it weird? We're here and we're both outsiders." And he said, "Do I know you?" And she said, "Oh, I know you, but I don't know you."
And then
kind
that
of
conversation gets cut off at that point.
Yeah. So, is she surprised when he doesn't recognize her, or does she say that to spite him because she knows he doesn't recognize her?
Oh, I don't know.
There's a lot of complexity there.
Exactly, and it plays into the second question I had, which is why does she tell him when she tells him that she's the nursery teacher? Oh, I won't tell Agnes, because did she think she was gonna have a relationship with this guy she knows is in a marriage?
No, to me, so that's the point where he's clearly the day after been like, oh, I regret it. What, I've made a mistake, and he's like freezing her out. So to me, she's saying that to get at him and say, you freeze me out. Okay, well, ha ha ha, joke's on you, because I actually know your child and your wife.
But it seems a bit of a silly thing to do.
I guess it's like a...
I know, yeah, you would probably say something to spite them back.
Yeah.
But yeah, not the best idea.
And also to be like, I'm also a human. Take that.
Yeah, I guess so.
Heitir ég alveg Nick?
Hvað? Er þetta eitthvað pick-up-líða?
Nei, bara spá, veist. Þetta sé eitthvað vinnunafn.
Hvað heitir þú eitthvað annað í þinni vinnu, eða? Nei, ég heiti nú bara Eik. Þannig að nú veistu hver ég er. Ég alltaf veit hver þú ert.
Ég veit ekkert hver þú ert. Þú heitir Eik og...
Og... Sófaníasdóttir.
Og...
Og... Ég barnabarn Þorsteins Blöndal.
Já. Auðvitað. Þess vegna ertu hérna.
Hvað?
Sorry, ég held að var hérna...
Hvað?
Ég held bara að var í... Wow.
Kannski er ég það bara.
So Solvi's story, yeah, like we said, it feels a little bit kind of extraneous. Like, it's almost like a satellite story that, in my mind, is there to highlight this important piece of Icelandic history, but really, for the plot, is all it is doing is giving Maury an excuse to sell his house. I think, looking at it cynically,
I wish somebody had come and offered me twice what my house was worth.
Well, I did the calculations, right? Based on, I mean, this is rubbish financial figuring, but he sells his house for something like 150 million kroner. That's what he's offered by Solvi. If that's what he sold it for now, that's about £900,000. Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. That'll get you to Sardinia.
Yeah.
But I guess that what I like about Baldvin Z is he's really the one director we've looked at who specifically is dealing with current issues in the city.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen a lot of rural life and modern rural life. We've seen a lot of contemporary stories, but none like his two films that are really very much about the stuff that you don't see in film or even on telly. I know that Hera Hilmar had said to Baldvin in the run-up to this film, like, oh, people don't do sex work in Reykjavik. I don't know how old she was going into this film, but she was unaware that it happened. And Baldvin's like done his research, as he did with Let Me Fall. Like, oh, no, it definitely happens.
Yeah.
But she was so unaware because it's not talked about, it's not represented. And yeah, I guess that's what I love about his films, is that we see these things. We see tragedy, we see sex work, we see drug addiction, we see all of these things. Now in this film we see the wealthy arsehole bankers who brought the country to its knees, which we didn't even really see in Gunnar, which is the most political thing we've actually watched. So yeah, I guess I'm a big fan of Baldvin Z, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Same.
Did you prefer this to Let Me Fall or the other way around?
I think I preferred Let Me Fall because I think it did gritty realism in a bit more of a realistic way. I would say that this has a lot of, like I said, empathy and humanity and realism. But actually, if you look at the intricacies of the narrative, they're not necessarily that believable. Well, a lot of people who are, alcoholics and down and out don't get offered 900 grand for their house.
Sure.
Some people do because the development happens, but
Mhm.
a lot of the happenings of the plot were on, not that they were unbelievable, but they were on the unusual end of things. Whereas I think in Let Me Fall, it's much more depressingly typical.
Yeah, I think you can see the machinations of the script here, really trying to bring the stories together. Yeah, whereas Let Me Fall felt a little bit more naturalistic. But the films do feel similar. Like, we can obviously see Baldvin's progression and his improvements as he's moved forward. But he's been working with the same people every time. So Olafur Arnalds, the famous Icelandic composer and musician, he did the soundtrack to this and Let Me Fall. And I think in this, it does a good job of doing those scenes of pure kind of melancholy and sadness really well, with the piano and Hera just looking hopeless at some points, combined with that kind of the fast-paced world of the banking, which he did again in Let Me Fall, with the parties and that kind of dream atmosphere. I think Let Me Fall had a bit more of a sense of its own cinematic sound, I guess. I don't know. Whereas this, maybe that's because of the three stories, that they're very different, that they all had to have their own score in a way. Did you notice the music at all?
No.
Is that something that, typically would you come out of a film and be like, oh, I love the music?
I would. And actually I didn't clock it, which is perhaps to my detriment, or I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign.
Well, no, I think
it's working quietly away.
Like I've said before on this podcast, like, it's not doing the John Williams thing where it's like amping you up, bringing you down. It's just sort of maybe setting the tone, but it's there and it kind of accentuates what needs to be accentuated. And again, it looks brilliant. It feels very different to the other kinds of films we've seen, and that's not just because it's set in the city. Baldvin works with cinematographer Johan Manni Johansson, who, I don't know, he just brings this kind of, it feels like you're there. I don't know how to describe it. I wrote some notes down about other people whose work has made me feel like I was in a place. And I guess with Life in a Fishbowl, it really does need to give you a sense of that place, because we need to see Reykjavik. But it reminded me of David Simon, the guy who created The Wire and Treme, two programs where you truly feel in the cities. Like, I've never been to America, let alone to New Orleans, but I feel like I've been to New Orleans for at least a year, just in the town, getting involved with the characters, the locals, and I don't know, there's something about this film and Let Me Fall. Just,
do you think it's that there's more of a focus on the characters and the narratives than, and so the rest of it is kind of fitting in around that? It's all about this, the story and the people, whereas quite a lot of the films we've seen, the landscape has been pretty much a character of its own, and it's been as much about Iceland and the vast expanse of beauty that is Iceland as the characters and the plot.
Very possibly, yeah. But that and also just the setting of Reykjavik, like, we are there and we do get to see a lot of it. Like in Thirst, for example, very, very low budget film. We see Hallgrímskirkja, but we don't get a sense of the city. Here we get to see, bars, churches, the lake. Just we go everywhere, and it just feels like a much more rounded city presence. And it just looks stunning, I think, which is what you can do with a budget, I guess. But yeah, shout out to those guys, because filmmakers developing a working relationship that works, if you can keep that going,
you're onto a winner. And
clearly, Let Me Fall was fantastic, was a step on from this. Who knows what we're going to get next, but I'm very excited about it.
Me too.
Amazing. Well, I guess that'll do.
We've rambled on long enough.
Yeah. I will just say one thing. I love that Florida was a yacht. There are some budget constraints.
I thought that maybe it wasn't filmed in Florida.
Perhaps. Anyway, good film. What a film! And such fantastic performances! It's no wonder that Hera Hilmar is now one of Iceland's biggest acting exports. She can be seen in the film adaptation of Mortal Engines, written and produced by Peter Jackson, the TV series Da Vinci's Demons, and the TV series C, in which she plays Jason Momoa's wife. But the near future holds a lot in store for Icelandic cinema, and we're very excited. There's loads of potential new films for us to cover on Kvikmyndapod in the new year, but before we get there, stay tuned for one more episode this side of Christmas. Because finally, Guðmundur Arna Guðmundsson's Beautiful Beings is being released in the UK on December the 19th, and we'll do a full spoiler-filled episode as a little Christmas present for you all. Until then, thank you all once again for listening and for all your support over the last 4 series. And thanks to every single person involved in creating the films we've covered. We appreciate and are passionate about the amazing work you do. So we'll see you in December. In the meantime, say hi on Twitter and Instagram. And if you'd like to support us on Ko-fi, we're at kofi.com/kvikmyndapod. Also, if you fancy getting lost in some amazing Icelandic cinema, or just world cinema in general, don't forget you can still take advantage of our collaboration with Mubi, where you can get a free 30-day trial at mubi.com/kvikmyndapod. That's it for now. Speak soon. Tack or bless. Thanks and goodbye.